We're getting ready to start back up now. I am going to introduce our next panel. She's the Spark. And I have the pleasure of introducing Janae Holloway. She is a special projects editor at Glamour. Janae manages various aspects of the Girl Project, Glamour's nonprofit initiative for girls' education, including its editorial coverage, event planning, and strategic planning and development. She also contributes regularly to Glamour's digital content with a focus on race, politics, and culture. Prior to joining Glamour, Janae worked in the Obama White House for 2 years and was a corps member with Teach for America Los Angeles. I'm going to turn it over to Janae now.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Brooke, for that really warm welcome. I am so excited for this panel today to talk to these amazing young activists who are doing really creative things for social justice and empowerment across the country. So I'd like to start. Can each of you just tell me a little bit about yourselves, your name, and then what girl power means to you?
My name is Nora, aka Aquafina, and I guess girl power means the ability to have or feel powerful without the girl in front of it.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about what you do and...
Oh, yeah. I started as a rapper on YouTube in 2012 and have since shot a couple movies, so
Awesome.
I'm doing that. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
Hi, my name is Nellie. I'm co-founder for Artivism Galleries. We're a pop-up collective that does a lot of pop-up galleries. We do a lot of artist talks, and we also do workshops. And what girl power means to me is knowing that you're bringing other girls up with you, or females, however you identify in that way, and really thinking about taking this intersectional approach to bring others and empower their voices.
Cool. Hi, I'm Amanda. Thanks so much for having me here. I'm super excited. I am the National Youth Poet Laureate of the United States, which is a long title. Oh, thank you. Which I didn't know what a laureate was until I became one, so I'll just explain it quickly. It basically means you're given kind of an award or a title to represent poetry, youth, and the arts for the United States. So it's been an exciting year. For me, girl power, similar to you, is young women and older women working together to uplift each other, to create a legacy that is greater than themselves.
Absolutely. My name is Blair Imani. I am the founder and executive director of Equality for Her, a group that I started in college. And so it's like constantly really wild to me that it's like still a thing, because I thought, it's like it's college, But, now we have an office, and it's just, really continuing to grow. And so right now, with Equality for Her, we've been using like art to inform people about anything from like awareness about domestic violence in a kind of gender neutral way to our forthcoming book, Modern Herstory. But girl power, to me, it reminds me of Spice Girls. I don't know if I was
Definitely
diehard Spice Girls, but like in modern context. Not that the 90s were not modern, but anyway, it's like that kind of collective power of people coming together, people who are feminine identifying as women, girls, coming together to build, like you were saying, and bringing people together forward. But it's like, that engine of just intense power that happens when we all get together.
And Blair, just to continue going on your Modern Herstory project, tell me a little bit more about that. I know your focus is making sure feminist history is inclusive. Can you tell me why that's important, that representation is important in literature?
That's a whole other panel. No, but I like to involve the audience. How many of y'all saw a person on TV who looked like you growing up? How many of you didn't? And so it's like, kind of an even split of the room almost. And for me, I didn't realize how important that was until I saw Kamala Harris on TV when she was, getting more involved in politics. And I was like, oh my gosh, she looks like my family. She looks like me. I can do that too. And then I didn't realize there was something holding me back. Like there was something in the back of my mind that said, because I don't see anybody who looks like me, I can't do this. And that freaked me out because I started talking to my dad about it. He was like, well, yeah, And my dad, he's very meta. He'll be like, well, what if cancer could have been cured many times over, but there were just people who didn't have access and resources, so that he's always like, worst case, big picture scenario. And I was like, okay, but like, what if there's just people who feel like they can't, take STEM courses because they don't have somebody who looks like them or that they can identify with in their textbooks? And so that's what I want Modern History to be. I want it to be the mix of a coffee table book to a textbook to curriculum, full of women from, just all backgrounds, really centering trans women, disabled folks, women of color, and black women who are leading the movement and who have come before us. So the first woman in the book is Sylvia Rivera, which is really exciting because a lot of folks like to, kind of sleep on her and act like she wasn't the founder of the modern LGBTQ rights movement, but in fact she was with Marsha P. Johnson. So it's really awesome to be able to, at 23, make a book that will help educate folks.
Totally. And I think that what's really interesting about that is that all of you are using really different creative ways to reach audiences about really important big issues. Nellie, tell me about your artivism and what you've been doing with your pop-up galleries and just how that's been being received, and what do you think the message is that's coming across?
Okay, so to give a little bit of the background to Artivism Galleries, it was a spontaneous event. So I actually went to school for political science and women gender studies. Any poli-sci women gender studies? Woo! Yeah. But I did apply to school to be an art major, and long story short, I decided that wasn't the path for me. But I realized that art was so essential to my life, and I also realized in conversations with friends, it was a way I could talk and engage with people on different issues. So a lot of my research has to do with ending sexual violence, and then some sexual violence is something that's so hard to talk about. It's not something that you can just easily talk about, like I was raped, it's something that you can't put a concrete thing to it. So I felt that art was a way that you can engage people in those conversations. So in spring 2015, I had a pop-up gallery on New York City Artivist, and I had another pop-up gallery in spring 2016 on New York City feminist artivists who focus on ending sexual violence. And the ideas behind those artivism galleries came up to the point where it was just me and my friends who would just talk about these things, and knowing that I could talk about these things because I researched them, but knowing that my friends couldn't engage in these same conversations because of how complex these issues can get with race and class, economic status, your gender identity. So I used art as a way to work with my friends to make these pop-up galleries come to life at my campus, Pace University, New York City. Yeah. So we organized these galleries as a way to start the conversation, because I like to think that when you have pop-up galleries, you're breaking the stigma that art is only found in museums, when you can see art everywhere. You see it in the streets, on stickers, on murals. New York City it's a mural capital. You can go anywhere and you'll see something that you'll react to, and that's something that you want art to do. So Artivism Gallery started off with pop-up galleries at Pace University, and then the following years after that, so basically a year ago, we started doing artivist talks. So I invited some street artist friends that I knew in New York City, Anne Lewis. Some people might know her as GILF. She came in. I had the director of the documentarian behind Street Heroines, the first New York City female graffiti artist documentary, Alexandra Henry. Yes, I call her by Alex, so I always forget. But I had them come in and talk about what is it about art that motivated them to share their story through these different through these different mediums. Yeah. So
that sounds really amazing. And I think what's so important is that we are using different mediums to reach people who might not automatically get it. I think initially when I started my career, I was at the White House, and I thought the way I wanted to change the world was through policy work. And then when I got to Glamour, I realized that I had this different platform that's speaking to 12 million women, and we weren't always talking about the intersectional feminist issues that I experience and that some other women experience. And so I wanted to make sure that Glamour started writing content that really felt inclusive. And so I'm actually writing something this weekend about the first time I saw myself on TV, and I'm talking about the show Insecure, which I'm sure many of you have seen, and I love, love, love. And so I think that's really important, using art, using books, using rap, and then using words. And I'd love to hear from Amanda about how you use your poetry to reach people.
I was so enthralled. I was like, it's my turn to speak now. I have to get back into the zone of talking. Sure. So for me, poetry has always been type of a platform to make social change. For me, if I wrote poetry without trying to make progress, without trying to make a difference, it would feel empty and without a purpose. I'm a type of person where my art is inherently connected to my beliefs as an activist and as an advocate. So one of the ways I try to do that as Poet Laureate is bringing young people into the conversation of literacy, literature, and also kind of the arts realm. A lot of times, not only if you're young, but if you're a woman or if you're a person of color, there's types of walls that kind of come up before you in the arts communities, specifically around poetry and kind of the elitist view of what is a poet, what does it mean to really be a profound writer. So as Youth Poet Laureate, I try to write pieces that speak to voices that are kind of hushed throughout the dialogue, but also I try to bring other young people into the room. I'll just talk about this, I'm kind of like we're being filmed, whatever. So, when I was named U.S. Youth Poet Laureate, that was the first time they've ever done it before. So I'm kind of like the guinea pig testing it out. So I always say I feel like, what's that Dr. Seuss book with like the little people on a clover and they're like, I'm here. That's how I always feel. I have to like go door to door to door and say, hey, there's a lot of young people around the country who are phenomenal writers and they need to be brought into these spaces. So I visited the Library of Congress a few weeks ago to talk with them about what we can do to bring in young people into the type of power that the Library of Congress holds and how we can include them in the youth poetry program. So I'm really excited that that is now something that's being worked upon and that a lot of these spaces that were kind of a bit more reserved for adults are actually being opened up to youth, and not only the content, but the leadership. And I think that's really important. So that's a few things about me.
And who is your inspiration? Who did you look up to as you started writing?
Ooh, everybody. For me, as cliche as it sounds, I am perpetually in love with Maya Angelou. I just think there's something, yes, snaps all around. Because growing up, I often talk about how I personally had a speech impediment, which made it difficult for me to communicate kind of orally my ideas. And Maya Angelou was mute for a few years growing up after she was raped and experienced sexual assault. And so seeing or hearing about, because I never got to meet her, but hearing about this black woman who had this type of impediment to speaking up, who became this global voice for peace, for equality, for writing, that's something that always inspired me. It's like, it doesn't matter how you talk or when you talk, it matters what you're speaking up for. And that's what I always think about.
And speaking of speaking up, Nora, tell us how you use rap and comedy to reach people.
I think I definitely have not done as much as the rest of these ladies up here, but I think like the way that you reach a lot of people nowadays is, especially like the way that I did through YouTube, is by making them feel like uncomfortable. And I think like people respond to things that make them feel uncomfortable, that bring them out of like their bubble. And I think at the same time, people respond just as strongly to things that that they've never seen and that they find relatable on some level. And I think for me, like, I didn't know that Aquafina was going to be a source of power for young women. I had no idea like what she would be taken as, but she empowered young Asian women and especially young Asian American women who felt that they are seen as a certain way and can't talk about certain issues. To see an Asian American woman talk about the things that I talk about.
I would love to hear, what are the things that you think are most important?
I think right now, well, what do you mean, like or just in general? Like,
well, what are the things that you tend to rap about, and what are the social issues that you try to bring forward?
I think a big concept of Aquafina's music is power of your vagina, I guess. I'll just say it. You just watch my videos, you'll get it. And I think like just even the act of having pride in something like that, or talking about it in any kind of like blunt way is enough to make people really like feel uncomfortable and like really feel like, what does she do? Like, who is this girl? And at the same time, it kind of made a lot of people like, why has no one else done this? Like, why is there a song called My Dick allowed to be, like, you know what I mean, and not the opposite? And why can't we feel proud about things like that? And so, yeah, I think that's a big thing.
And do you have any role models in this space we've talked a lot about representation today, do you have any role models in this space who look like you, or do you feel like you are a trailblazer in that arena?
I think that, like, you know, people can say like, oh, you know, you didn't really grow up with like any Asian people or whatever. Margaret Cho is a big part of my growing up, and I think she still remains a really important piece for Asian American women because she is outspoken, and in the activist circle, she puts the issues before the comedy and before her own shame and her own like how the media perceives her. She's willing to talk about things that embarrass her and that are very, very controversial, and not for the sake of comedy, but for the sake of putting it out there. And I've had the chance to work with her, and she's literally the same person, like in person, you know?
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty lit. She's great.
So ladies, I'd love to hear from you. Obviously, all of you have been so active on your campuses. I'd love to hear from you about like maybe one thing you think that the women here could do on their campuses and in their high schools to change their immediate communities and eventually maybe change the world. We can start with Blair.
Yeah, I was like, oh, so many things. It's going to be a long story. I'm going to try to abbreviate it.
Go ahead.
So I went to school in Louisiana State University, go Tigers. And it was really difficult. I'm from Southern California, so I was like, racism's not a thing, which is hilarious now. It was obviously a thing in California, but, you know, I wasn't woke yet. So when I got to LSU, it was like a constant process of getting woke, of, you know, observing things in my community. I started doing LGBTQ activism because I was hearing stories of, you know, people getting reported by their high schools that they were gay to their parents and then being completely cut off, or finding out on social media that you were at an event for LGBTQ folks and your parents cut you off. And so there were just small things, like I think something that's so important that is often missed, you know, we hear about protests, like I was arrested at a protest, and that's an important way to, you know, kind of leverage, use like political pressure to leverage folks for, you know, policy change, for example, but it's also not the only way, and it's so trauma intense. So one thing like that you can do immediately is just, you know, find communities and hold space. I think that something that we needed on LSU's campus and perpetually needed was just like spaces to hold vigils and just come together and like not always mourn, but like just be and have our feelings and not have those feelings policed by our parents or by, you know, professors, or not have your emotions only be during finals when you're super stressed out, you know, just having somebody to have, you know, a great time with. So there was something we did called First Fridays, and it was the first Friday of the month, just folks got together just to talk and be outside of class, and that's something I've been trying to do, especially in New York, because everybody wants to talk about your career and your major and where are you, you know, what are you doing in the world. And so finding those intentional times to hang out with people who are new to you and to just talk about something that's not related to you know, your productivity, to the economy, and it's so healing. So, you know, organizing those spaces, that's a huge part of activism. We talk more and more about self-care, but it's so real. Like, you will get burnt out if you don't spend that time. So include that as part of your activism, whether it's, you know, through First Fridays or just linking up with people and then talking about something not related to school. It's highly important.
Cool beans. I'm next. Cool. I actually have two quick pieces of advice about what you can do on your campus. My first piece of advice is to make sure you're not the only woman in the room. So I go to school at Harvard in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which, as you can expect, being a school that was founded like before the United States of America, we do have, you know, a lot of residual kind of sexism and racism. And more often than not, I find in political clubs, STEM clubs, or whatever, too often women are not brought into the conversation. And I am interested in political science, so I'm always at this place called the Institute of Politics, but I make sure to try to bring my friends, and they're like, we don't want to become president. Why should we come? I'm like, well, you deserve to be in that room. We need more of people like you in that room, whether you become a politician or not. So go to your girl gang, no matter who they are, and try to bring them into those spaces. My second piece of advice is to have an activist life on and off campus. I think campus is a great place to have a type of local network, but there's so much going on in your cities and your local areas that you can get involved in. Too often I hear from girl leaders who are so passionate, have so much to give, that after school ends, they kind of don't know what to do with themselves. Like, I'm not leading my She's the First chapter anymore, I'm not whatever. But if you continue to have a network of women who inspire and support you, both off and on campus, then that type of identity and leadership and passion will just continue throughout your life. So those are two pieces of advice for me.
I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to interrupt anymore. But there's also one other thing that you reminded me of. It's like when you're doing that on-campus activism, I know I've gotten caught up in like, oh, this is so awesome. Like, people are listening to me. Make sure that you're not the only one speaking. You know, like, there's different levels of privilege and taking up space. And so my thing at LSU, I realized, okay, I'm getting invited into space largely because I'm doing this activism, but also I'm getting chosen over my friends who are darker skinned, who have kinky hair, who, don't fit that Eurocentric standard of beauty or respectability. And so I had to make that conscious effort to be passing that mic. And so when you're also doing that, it's crucial to not seek more recognition when you're doing your activism, which will help so much of that ego, but to seek you creating that change, because the more change you create, the more people will start to recognize, and the more authentic your activism continues to be. So that's the other thing.
That's a lot to go off of, but so two keywords that came to my mind were apathy and showing up. That's actually 3 words. So our campus, Pace University, I'm really open about this. So it's a very apathetic climate in terms of activism. So in terms of the way that I would talk about, engage with other younger activists is like show up to things, be interested, and just like what Blair mentioned, like show that you're interested, and also make sure you're not the only person in the room who's speaking, because it's so easy to get caught up in the fact that, this is Nellie speaking again, talking about ending rape on campus and policy work. And it's very easy to become that model student who's like, go to Nellie for this, or go to Vicky for communications. She's here today with me. Or just go to other people that will talk about it. But that's not the point of activism. The point of campus activism is that you build this community that's sustainable, and you carry it on so that once you're gone, once you graduate, you have a team of badass females, males, LGBTQ individuals ready to lead that fight on. Because I can definitely say that before I graduated, I helped Vicky and I and other co-founders, we started an organization called #PaceYouAndRape in response to a Huffington Post article about a sexual assault case that happened on our campus. And we definitely had no idea that it would kick off on our campus in a way that it would affect everyone once we started tweeting. And one of the big challenges now, which I'm really transparent about because Pace You and Rape is always going to be something so close to my heart, is the fact that we're struggling a little bit with our leadership in terms of how are we going to sustain this movement after we're gone. And that happens in all activist circles. Once you have your go-getters who start the movement begin, there's always that challenge of finding who's going to come next, and there's that extra pressure. So remember that the activism life is never perfect. It seems perfect because you see all these articles that are group of students leads an activist movement across campus, yay, to policy change. But that's surface level. So I guess my other piece of advice to end off is that activism is not a circle. It's a lot of squiggly lines on a piece of canvas, and you can't do it without people. So show up and find your people.
Are we supposed to have a campus, or? Because I'm super old. Okay, I haven't. Well, I mean, okay. I'm just like just looking back. 50 years ago, when I was on a campus, that was not Harvard, by the way. It was SUNY. It was SUNY. Well, I think like in terms of like when you're in college, I think like there is an element of conformity. Like you feel like you have to conform to what your peers are doing, and I think creatively, you can feel stunted and you can feel not individual. And I mean, this might go against some tenets of activism, but I think it's important to sustain whatever creative mediums like you had growing up into college, I made music throughout college, and I had some kind of internet presence, whether it was like blogging or YouTubing, that I think is something that you should keep up when you're in college. I think that's like, just to maintain your frame of mind, continue to be creative, continue making art, but also try to share it and trying to make sure that your art isn't influenced by like fear of like what you're saying, or like fear that the message could be construed as like bad, or maybe not that, but just keep making art and be creative, and don't let your environment stunt that at all.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll take it back to a long time ago when I was in college too. I went to Spelman College in Atlanta, and that was an all-black women's college, and it was the most transformative experience of my life. I grew up in Indiana, and I grew up in Indianapolis, and I was not woke either, because Indianapolis is a very blue city, and Indiana is a very red state, and I had no idea until I went to Spelman. And we've been talking a lot today about creative activism, but I also want to get back to the roots of a change that we can make in 2018. If you are seeing a world right now that you do not like, if you are seeing an administration that doesn't feel inclusive to you, or that is not doing the kinds of things for people like you, or for issues that you care about, there's something that you can do in 2018 to change it. There are local elections, and we need to change the Congress if we want to stop some of the negative actions that are going on in the United States today that are hurting the communities that we're talking about on this stage, women, LGBTQ, people of color, and many more. So if you want to do something, what I did on campus was I had the privilege of being on Young Democrats my sophomore year of college, and I had the privilege of voting for the first Black president, which was a huge moment for me. And we did a campus registration, and then we also went throughout the West End, which is a low-income community in Atlanta, and we made sure to register as many people as wanted to be registered. And that was so important, and the turnout that year was huge. And the turnout last year was unfortunately low among young people and millennials. So if you're too young, you can still go out and register people. There were freshmen who are helping us register people. And if you are old enough, make sure you get registered for 2018 so that you can vote for people, to put people in Congress who are gonna stand up for the issues that you care about, and then write to them and call them all the time, and then we can get some real change happening before 2020. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Brooke.
I have a really quick announcement, really quick.
Oh,
if I could
sure.
So I'm super excited. On Tuesday, I start my new job at Do Something, and I'll be the civic action and campaigning lead.
Awesome.
So if you like what you heard and you're down to change things for the better, please just keep in touch. Stay on my Twitter page. We'll all meet afterward. But I'm so excited to just kick butt and to change things, and it's so amazing to be here.
Great. Awesome. Okay, so we would be happy to take any questions that you might have. There are 2 mics on either side, so feel free to just go up to the mic, and then we can take them from there.
Yes,
Don't be
girl.
shy.
I see her standing up. Yes.
Yes, stand up for
We'll
change.
wait. Y'all, this is She's the First. There should not be only one person being the first person to go to the mic. Like, come on now.
Hi. Okay. So you guys are all about art and sort of different mediums to get your work out there, and everyone has a medium that they can use to get their ideas out there. But a lot of the times, it does feel like your work is falling on deaf ears, and obviously you have to work past that. But do you guys have any tips on staying motivated through that?
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think when you're always gonna, in anything that you do, you're gonna face people not like feeling like you're doing all this work and it's not really getting picked up in anything that you do, especially in any kind of like entertainment art medium. That can definitely like impact your process. But I think the most important thing is consistency. And right now it may be on deaf ears, but like if later on it continues to build and it continues to be this big thing and not something that you just picked up, you know, like last month, if it's something that's very like true to you and you just keep on building it, just know that eventually it won't, like it, no matter what it is, it'll be its own thing.
And then building off of consistency, so I'm really big on vision boards because I also really believe that with consistency, there's a lot of mental power that goes into just like executing work. So besides the work I do for Artivism Galleries, I'm also an artist on the side, and to go from grad school to doing art in my free time is weird, but definitely staying consistent and knowing that there's a lot of power in just practicing what you do and that there's a bigger picture to it, realizing that your story is one story out of like all the other stories that you have to share, and having a really great support network to help you go through that, and just having venting sessions with them. That's been a huge help for me, and it's powerful in itself, the little things that you do every day.
I'll speak really quickly to a way to stay motivated, especially in performance art. I was just talking about sometimes it's not kind of the response that you'd like, but I think that's why it's all the more important to be highly aware of your own personal purpose and to try to extract that from any type of acknowledgement or recognition from other people. Because that could come after years, that could come after decades for some people. And to not only be aware of that mentally, but to write it down, have it on a vision board. I call these literary talismans. They're probably just like mantras, whatever, I don't know. But it's something that I write down about myself that I repeat to myself in times of doubt, anxiety, insecurity, and it reminds me of who I am. So mine goes something like, I am a writer. I'm descended from Black freedom fighters who broke chains and changed the world. And whenever I'm in the bathroom crying, whenever I'm like, this thing I wrote didn't get published, I repeat that to myself, and I'm fine because I know who I am and I know what I stand for. So I'd really highly suggest taking some time today or this week to write down 4 sentences about yourself that speak to your identity, your history, and your hopes, and that can really help you stay motivated.
Thank you. Next question.
So, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, in a world where there's so many worthy causes, how do you guys have the ability to say no to certain causes? Because something that I've had problems with recently is just saying yes, yes, yes to everything, that I feel like my efforts can never be focused, and they get kind of muddled, if that makes sense.
That is so real.
A lot of sense.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, please.
Feeling it. No. I was in the same spot. I was at college. I did a thread about it recently. I'll retweet it soon. But I was just exhausted because I was like, if I'm napping, who's going to organize this event? If I'm sleeping, who's going to organize this thing? If I stay up till 2 a.m., I can wake up at 6 a.m. and I can show up to this community meeting. And so it can happen. And my mom's like, don't get burned out. And I'm like, that's an abstract thing. What does it mean to get burnt out? And so for me, I had to learn to say no because I was like extremely sick. And like it was hilarious because after like I got myself together, I was like, Blair, you look so great. And I'm like, did I look that bad? And I did because I wasn't eating. So I was like, if I go to the grocery store, that's a waste of time. And if I do this, that's a waste of time. And so that's a really toxic place to get in. So I think balance is so crucial. If it means that you just set an hour on your calendar every day to do nothing or just scroll through Twitter and like have that be your time to just chill, that's a great way to get started. But then also to realize that I think for me, I got into that savior complex. Like, if I don't do it, nobody else will. And the great thing about, bringing your girl gang with you, like you were saying, and making sure that you're not the only one there, is that you're starting to build and make a network of people who can also advocate. And so you pick that thing that makes it hard for you to sleep at night and not saving the world. One specific thing, for me, I'm thinking so much about these voting rights laws and how people, we've won voting rights, but there's still this like kind of attack on voting rights, which is why I'm glad I have this new job at Do Something. But that's where I am right now. And so while I care about so many other things, I know that there are people who that's their whole life. And so you start to specialize, but then you also show up to other people's stuff. So that way you're not leading, but you're supporting. And that way you lead your own things and then they support your stuff. And that's how we build movements, and that's how you stay healthy and happy and not burn out.
Yeah, I would say really quickly the same thing. At Glamour, I started working on our Girl Project, which is our girls' education initiative, because I do care so much about education policy and providing the education that every girl deserves around the world. And then I found that while Glamour is a deeply feminist magazine, it was not necessarily as intersectional as I wanted it to be. And I knew that nobody else was going to do that work if it wasn't me. And so I went to my editor-in-chief and I pitched her an entire editorial strategy on race and politics. And she has given me the license to write about the things that I think are important and pitch them and bring them up, because sometimes some people just aren't even thinking about them. So I can't sleep at night when I don't see enough covers of women of color across the board at Condé Nast. And I think that's what my contribution is, even a little bit more than what the Girl Project is. And so I think you find your space, you find what keeps you up at night, and you focus on that. I'll take the next question.
Thank you.
Okay, so I actually, like you, I grew up in Indiana.
Oh my God, where?
So, Greenfield.
Oh, wow.
So I, as a white young woman, I, fit in. But when I moved to New York, I didn't know, I was only 8, so I didn't know a lot of things that were going on. But every summer that I went back, I kept seeing that, like, my grandparents, like, didn't necessarily like anyone who wasn't like them. And so, but even here, I've gotten, because I am white, I get a lot of, oh, you don't know what's going on with them, you can't help them. Like in any way that, like, if I wanted to, like saying I wanted to go here, like, what do you know about that? So I just didn't know if any of you had any advice for someone who's told that they can't help someone just because they necessarily don't know what's going on. Does anybody have?
I can speak to that.
Sure.
I think for me, like I was saying earlier at LSU, realizing like privilege and being a light-skinned Black woman, there are like just a vast amount of things that I'm not going to understand about the experience of a dark-skinned Black woman. And so while it sucks and while I want to be able to like help my sisters in any way possible, which I know that you're feeling right now, I can like, sense the frustration. It sucks, And so I think acknowledging that it sucks is very important. But then also realizing that there's a reason for that. There's like a legacy of distrust. We look at colorism in the Black community. There's just so much distrust that it's like hard for me to say to somebody, well, like, okay, well, your concerns and feelings are invalid, because there's so much trauma there. And so what I try to do is like listen to people and figure out how I can show up. And so if that means that I'm going to boost a signal, like, for example, before I converted to Islam during the Chapel Hill, killings, like I'm not Muslim, but I really want to organize for this, group of Muslims that got, murdered. And so I was kind of like, a little bit naive but overzealous, but it worked. I just called every mosque in the neighborhood and in the state, and I got some really great feedback. That's kind of like the really kind of gung-ho way to do it. But I think now because of social media, there's just so many avenues of ways, if it's whether you're showing up or when I was arrested in Baton Rouge, the really awesome thing was that, there were like white women there and they weren't like insisting on speaking over people of color. It was really beautiful allyship. And what I saw happen, the white women were telling, okay, white people, let's get in the streets because we're not going to get brutalized the same way that people of color are by the police because they, like you said, you fit in. It's privilege. And so using your privilege to defend people of color, but then also show up in the ways that they've asked. It's a skill, and then when you nail it or when you get close, you're always going to have to learn and revise and, take feedback, which also sucks, but it's all about the movement, But the really beautiful thing is, like, my boss when I was at Planned Parenthood completely transformed what the office landscape looked like because she took, like, initiative in how we're doing hiring practices. And so that's just one way to show up, So then realizing that it's not that you can't, but you can in other ways, and that it's about, kind of respecting that space. So I hope that's helpful, but yeah, it's a frustration.
And also to quickly say that I believe that listening is its own form of advocacy. If you can look up community board meetings or neighborhood discussions that are happening about race or gender in your neighborhood, which you're probably already going to, so many times there's people like us on the stage saying, we need this from allies, we need this from allies, we need this from allies, and it's falling on deaf ears. But by showing up and having an open ear to use your privilege or your gender or your race to speak up, I think that would be a great way for you to begin further with this journey.
And unfortunately, sorry, we have our last question, but I think these ladies will make themselves available after this to answer any other questions you might have. But can you give us the last question?
Hi, I'm Srinidhi Shah from McMaster University in Canada. And I just wanted to ask, so I know all of your modes of expression is art, and I've noticed that it's unconventional art. And I'm an artist myself, but I know that it's when it comes to technicality in the art form, it's difficult to sometimes find someone who has been doing the same thing as you in the past. Like if you're writing a sonnet, you can look up a Shakespeare or someone. But when you're doing rap about feminism or something really cutting edge that is really relevant to now, how do you find modes of inspiration? How do you know how to improve and go further with your work?
Nora, you want to take?
Yeah, I mean, when I was writing, I didn't listen to a lot of things, so it was kind of like the opposite of seeking inspiration. I felt that a lot of music sounded the same, and I felt like it would throw off my process if I was literally just trying to copy some, or just like allow myself to be influenced really heavily, and by shutting things out, I think that a couple of my songs came out like super original and like super out there, that to the point where some people don't even understand some of them. It's just like, what is this? And I feel like that like helped a little bit. And I think it's okay to have art that's like not already out there, because that'll make you stick out. And I think it's okay to draw inspiration and influence, but I think to draw originality will set you apart in the art world more than anything. And so I think it's important to hold on to that as much as you can.
Well, thank you all so much for these amazing questions. Again, I think these ladies will make themselves available after, and I will too, if you have any other questions. And thank you for listening to us today.